Today is National Indigenous Peoples Day, and it is a time of recognition, reflection, and also to look at the next steps of Canada's long reconciliation journey. One Indigenous-led think tank says progress has been so slow, it's stopped tracking how many of the 94 calls to action have been completed. Eva Jewell is research director at the Yellowhead Institute. She joins us live now with more on that. Eva, good morning to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Now, Eva, the Yellowhead Institute considers only 13 of those recommendations to be fully completed. We know Canada is far behind on its reconciliation journey. Why is progress so slow?
Well, we've investigated that over the past 5 years that we were doing the reports, and there's about 5 different reasons, but the short of it is that Canada lacks the political will to actually implement the calls to action and to make good on the many promises that it's made over the years to Indigenous peoples. There's a lot of talk about what's going to happen, but when it comes to the follow through, it doesn't quite happen. So again, it comes down to lack of political will. Even folks within the federal government, like Mark Miller, have said that they've had a hard time working with their own kind of institutional structures to make changes at a pace that would be reasonable for us to to consider calls to action complete.
I want to pick up on that point of, what you say is a lack of political will in a moment. But I'm just curious because last year, your organization, your think tank found that 0 calls to action had been completed in all of 2023. I'm just curious if you're still keeping sort of a tab on where things stand and where we are this year, if any movement on any of those recommendations has been made so far in 2024.
Well, it's difficult because a lot of the action tends to take place around times like, in June or around the time of September 30th, which is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. So that was kind of the thinking around why we completed the report and the accountability measures at the end of each calendar year. There has been significant movement in the National Council for Reconciliation. We have several concerns about how that National Council is going to be moving forward and implemented, mainly around the lack of resources around the National Council for Reconciliation and the fact that many of its members will be selected by the federal government themselves rather than Indigenous-led organizations. So a few things that we flagged, and those are all contained within our report at yellowheadinstitute.org. You can read further into that.
So this is the same, federal government that put reconciliation on the national map that seems to have forgotten about its promise to follow through and to complete each of those recommendations. I suppose, how do you think is the best way to compel the federal government to do just that and follow through on its promise to Indigenous communities?
I think it's important for Canadians to remember that the federal government has never come to these conclusions of equity or justice for Indigenous peoples on their own. It has been as a result of Indigenous peoples pushing for justice. So even the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came as a result of national federal class action lawsuits against the federal government on the part of survivors. That was not, on the part of Canada's moral clarity to create a National Council or a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Canada usually is forced to, either by the courts or by, legal action on the part of Indigenous peoples, to engage in these acts of justice. So when we talk about Canada moving forward on, these types of what are considered progressive justice initiatives like the Reconciliation, Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the 94 calls to action, it's usually as a result of Indigenous-led action and activism.
Very quickly, Eva, because we know today is National Indigenous Peoples Day, but reconciliation is not a one-day event. What can non-Indigenous people do to help build a better future for all here in Canada?
Yeah, and we hear that a lot, and it's heartening to hear that a lot of non-Indigenous people are very much interested in advancing reconciliation and do not discount the importance and the efficacy of community-based organizing. So organizing just within your community to take up a call to action and study it and be aware of it? And how is it that you can compel maybe your MP or your political representative at any level, the city, provincial, or federal level, to engage in reconciliation? You know, only 3% of the population needs to advocate for change in order for it to occur. So if 3% of Canadians could make raise their voices about reconciliation, we could absolutely make change.
3%. Okay, Dr. Eva Jewell with the Yellowhead Institute, thank you so much for joining us and for your perspective this morning.
Chimigwech for having me.